A chance encounter in a struggling neighborhood. The streets of Willow Ridge had always been quiet, the kind of quiet that spoke of struggle rather than peace. The faded homes lined up like tired soldiers, their chipped paint and sagging porches telling the story of a neighborhood that had seen better days. Katherine Williams, a woman in her mid-40s, had lived here for nearly a decade. She had seen families come and go, businesses close, and hope flicker in and out like the dim streetlights that barely illuminated the road at night. Katherine wasn't wealthy, but she had always managed to make do with what little she had. She worked at a local community center, doing odd jobs from organizing food drives to running after-school programs for kids. The pay was modest, but it was enough to keep her small home running, and more importantly, it gave her a purpose. Katherine had a heart for giving, even if it meant stretching her resources thin. To her, kindness was the wealth she could share with the world. It was a rainy afternoon when she first saw him. Timothy. He couldn't have been more than 12 years old, sitting on the curb outside the corner store, drenched from the downpour. His clothes were too big for his frame, hand-me-downs that had seen better days, and his shoes were so worn they barely held together. There was something about the way he sat, shoulders slumped, staring at the ground, that tugged at Katherine's heart. She could tell he was hungry, not just for food, but for something more. Attention, compassion, maybe even hope. Katherine pushed her shopping cart through the store, but she couldn't shake the image of the boy outside. After she paid for her groceries, she stepped outside into the rain and saw that Timothy was still there, motionless, his eyes now scanning the cars passing by as if waiting for something that wasn't coming. "Hey, you all right?" Katherine asked as she approached him, her voice soft but filled with concern. Timothy didn't look up right away. He hesitated, as if debating whether to respond at all. "I'm fine," he muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. Katherine could tell he wasn't fine. There was a rawness in his voice, the kind that comes from someone who's had to be tough for too long. She knelt down beside him, her knees soaking into the wet pavement. "I've got some extra food in my cart," she said. "You're welcome to come back with me and have a meal if you'd like." Timothy finally looked up, his brown eyes wide with a mix of disbelief and suspicion. In this part of town, kindness was often met with skepticism. People weren't used to strangers offering help, and when they did, there was usually a price attached. "I'm not looking for charity," Timothy said, his voice now firm, almost defiant. Katherine smiled gently. "It's not charity, it's just a meal. Everyone needs one of those." There was a long pause, the rain pattering around them as Timothy considered her offer. Finally, with a resigned sigh, he nodded. "Okay, just this once." They walked together in silence, Katherine pushing her cart through the rain, Timothy trudging beside her, his head down, but his eyes scanning the streets. As they neared her house, Katherine could feel Timothy's apprehension grow. She wasn't surprised. Trust was a luxury many kids in this neighborhood couldn't afford. Inside her small but cozy home, Katherine set her groceries down and headed to the kitchen. Timothy stood awkwardly in the doorway, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. The warmth of the house contrasted sharply with the cold outside, but Timothy still seemed to shiver, though Katherine suspected it wasn't just from the rain. "Sit," she said, pointing to the small dining table in the corner. "I'll make something quick." Timothy hesitated again, but eventually sat down, his eyes scanning the room. It wasn't much, a modest house with mismatched furniture and old appliances, but it was warm, lived in. Katherine moved efficiently in the kitchen, heating up a pot of soup she'd made earlier in the week and cutting slices of bread. As she served the food, she noticed Timothy's hands tremble slightly as he picked up the spoon. He was trying to hide his hunger, but the way he devoured the meal made it clear he hadn't eaten properly in days. Katherine sat down across from him, giving him space, letting the silence stretch between them. After a few minutes, Timothy finally spoke, his voice quieter this time. "Thank you," he said, not looking up from his bowl. "You're welcome," Katherine replied simply. "Where's your family, Timothy?" His body tensed at the question. "My mom's. She's trying. But it's hard. She works 2 jobs. Sometimes there's not enough." Katherine nodded, not pressing further. She understood the unspoken details. There were a lot of families in Willow Ridge trying to survive, trying to make it to the next day. Timothy was one of many kids who had to grow up too fast, take care of themselves when there wasn't enough care to go around. That evening, after Timothy finished his meal, Katherine packed up some leftovers for him to take home. "You come by anytime, okay? If you ever need anything." Timothy nodded but didn't say anything as he left. Katherine watched him walk down the street, his figure disappearing into the mist of the rain, and she wondered if she'd ever see him again. But she had a feeling she would. Little did she know, that small act of kindness would ripple through time, setting in motion events that would change both of their lives in ways she could never have imagined. The seeds of gratitude. The days after that rainy encounter with Timothy went by in their usual rhythm for Katherine. She woke up early each morning, made her way to the community center, and did what she could to help the people around her. Her life had always been a quiet one, built on small gestures and modest acts of generosity. But ever since Timothy walked through her door that night, something had shifted. There was a weight to his presence that lingered in her thoughts long after he had left. She couldn't shake the image of him, soaked to the bone, sitting on that curb, his face full of defiance, but his heart clearly aching for something more than a meal. The following week, as she went about her errands, Katherine couldn't help but wonder if she'd see him again. She kept an eye out for the slight, wiry figure of the boy, but Timothy didn't return. It wasn't until 2 weeks later that he appeared on her doorstep once more, and when he did, Katherine wasn't surprised. It was as if she had been expecting him all along. It was a warm evening when she heard the hesitant knock on her door. Katherine wiped her hands on her apron and walked to the door, opening it to find Timothy standing there, looking almost as if he regretted coming. She greeted him with a smile that was both warm and welcoming. Timothy glanced down at the ground, shuffling his feet before he spoke. "I didn't know where else to go," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Katherine opened the door wider, stepping aside to let him in. "You're always welcome here," she said softly. This time, the visit was different. Timothy didn't just come for the meal, though he clearly needed one. There was something deeper in his eyes, something that said he was beginning to trust her, even if he didn't fully realize it yet. Katherine served him dinner again, the same simple soup and bread, but this time, Timothy ate slower, savoring the food, as if the meal meant more than just filling his stomach. They talked a little more that evening. It wasn't much. Timothy was still guarded, still reluctant to share too much of himself. But Katherine learned a few things. He lived with his mother, as he had mentioned before, in a rundown apartment across town. His father had left when he was just a baby, and his mother worked long hours cleaning houses to keep them afloat. "She's never home," Timothy said, staring into his bowl. "She tries, but it's hard. Real hard." Katherine nodded, her heart aching for the boy sitting across from her. She had seen it before, the weight of responsibility that too many kids in the neighborhood had to carry on their own. It wasn't fair, but life in Willow Ridge often wasn't. "Do you go to school?" Katherine asked, trying to gently guide the conversation. Timothy shrugged. "Sometimes, when I can." That answer hit Katherine harder than she expected. She had worked with so many kids in her time at the community center, and she knew what that "sometimes" really meant. It meant that Timothy was already slipping through the cracks of a system that wasn't designed to catch kids like him. He was barely holding on, and no one seemed to notice. "You're smart," Katherine said, her voice firm but kind. "I can tell. You could do something big with your life, Timothy." He looked up at her then, his brow furrowed in confusion. "How do you know that?" "You don't even know me." Katherine smiled, but there was a seriousness in her eyes that Timothy couldn't miss. "I don't have to know every detail about your life to see that you've got potential. It's written all over you, but you've got to believe in it too." Timothy didn't say anything, but the way he looked at her told her that no one had ever spoken to him like that before. No one had ever told him he was worth something, that he could be more than the hand he had been dealt. And while he didn't say a word, Katherine could see the impact her words had on him. From that night on, Timothy came by Katherine's house once or twice a week. Sometimes it was just for dinner. Other times he lingered longer, helping her with small chores around the house. He'd sweep the floors, take out the trash, or even help her in the garden. He didn't talk much, but Katherine didn't mind. She wasn't in a hurry to pull his walls down. She knew that trust took time, especially for a boy like Timothy, who had learned too early that the world wasn't a place where trust came easily. As the months passed, a routine began to form. Timothy's visits became more frequent, and Katherine noticed that he started looking healthier. The gauntness in his face began to fade, and there was a light in his eyes that hadn't been there before. He still didn't say much about his home life, but he didn't need to. Katherine could see the effects of his visits to her house, how the simple acts of kindness were doing more than just feeding his body. They were feeding his soul. One evening, as the summer sun set low in the sky, casting long shadows across the room, Timothy stayed later than usual. Katherine didn't mind. She had grown used to his company. They were sitting at the kitchen table, and for the first time, Timothy began to open up. "I used to think that no one cared," he said quietly, his eyes fixed on the worn wood of the table. "Not about me, not about what happens to people like us. My mom works so hard, but it's like no matter what she does, we're always just stuck." Katherine listened, her heart breaking for the boy across from her. She wanted to reach out, to tell him that it didn't have to be this way. But she knew that words alone wouldn't change the reality of his situation. What she could offer was something deeper: consistency, a place of refuge, and someone who would always care. "But then you," Timothy continued, his voice faltering for a moment before he looked up at her. "You gave me food when I didn't even ask. You didn't have to do that." Katherine's eyes softened, and she leaned forward slightly. "Sometimes, Timothy, the smallest things can make the biggest difference. It doesn't take much to show someone that they matter. And you matter. Don't ever forget that." Timothy looked down again, but this time there was a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I won't." For the first time since Katherine had met him, Timothy allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was something good in the world for him after all. That night, as he left her house with a bag of food in hand, he turned back at the door. "I'll pay you back one day," he said, his voice quiet but filled with determination. "I don't know how yet, but I will." Katherine smiled, watching him disappear into the night. She didn't need repayment, of course. To her, the act of giving was enough. But she knew that promise meant something to Timothy. It was his way of holding on to the hope that maybe life could be different. If not now, then one day. What Katherine didn't know was that Timothy's words weren't empty. A seed had been planted that night, a seed of gratitude and determination that would grow over the next decade. And when it finally bore fruit, it would change both of their lives in ways neither of them could have ever imagined. A young man's struggles and awakening. Years passed, and life in Willow Ridge continued its quiet, relentless grind. The streets didn't change much. If anything, they worsened. More shops closed, more houses fell into disrepair, and the faces of hope became fewer as the neighborhood grew more weathered with time. But through it all, one thing remained constant: Timothy continued to visit Katherine. By the time Timothy turned 16, he had grown taller, stronger, his face losing the last traces of childhood innocence. But the world around him had grown harsher too, and it was taking its toll. His once occasional school absences had turned into more frequent truancy. The pressures of home life were mounting. His mother, still working multiple jobs, seemed to be fighting a losing battle against the tide of bills, late rent notices, and constant exhaustion. Timothy, who had once been content to simply survive, now found himself standing at a crossroads, unsure of which path to take. The streets of Willow Ridge were unforgiving, and they offered temptations that were hard to resist. Kids his age had already begun to fall into the traps that the neighborhood laid out. Some turned to selling drugs, others to petty theft. The allure of fast money and the illusion of control in a world where control was so often stripped away was powerful. It was easy to see how Timothy could have ended up like so many others, just another statistic in a community that society had long since forgotten. But there was something in him that held him back, something that kept him from fully giving in to the despair that so many around him had accepted. And that something was Katherine. Even when life felt like it was closing in on him from all sides, Timothy would make his way to Katherine's house. Sometimes it was just to sit in the warm comfort of her small living room, other times to help her fix a broken fence or paint a worn-out wall. It wasn't the tasks that mattered. It was the presence. Katherine had become his refuge, a place where the chaos of his life couldn't touch him, even if only for a few hours. One evening, as Timothy was sitting on Katherine's porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, he let out a long, weary sigh. Katherine, who was sitting beside him with a cup of tea in her hand, glanced over at him, her eyes filled with the quiet understanding that only someone who had lived through hardship could offer. "What's on your mind, Timothy?" she asked softly, sensing that something heavier than usual was weighing on him. Timothy hesitated, his fingers nervously tapping the wooden railing of the porch. He had never been good at talking about his feelings, but Katherine had a way of making him feel like he didn't have to hide anything from her. Finally, he spoke. "I don't know if I can do this anymore," he admitted, his voice raw with frustration. "I try to stay out of trouble. I try to help my mom, but it never feels like enough. Everywhere I look, people are giving up. I'm starting to think maybe they're right. Maybe it's just easier to let it all go." Katherine set her cup down and turned to face him fully. "Easier isn't always better, Timothy. The easy road might feel like a way out, but it's not. It's a trap. Once you go down that path, it's hard to come back." Timothy clenched his fists, the tension in his body palpable. "But what if it's the only option? I can't even think about college. I can barely make it through school as it is. Everyone I know is either dropping out or getting into stuff they shouldn't. What am I supposed to do?" Katherine paused for a moment, considering her words carefully. She had always known that Timothy's situation was fragile, but hearing him speak so openly about his doubts made it painfully clear just how close he was to losing hope. She reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Timothy, I've seen you grow these past few years. I've seen how hard you work, how much you care, even when you don't say it. You've got something inside you that not everyone has. Resilience. You've already come this far. Don't let the world take that from you." Timothy didn't respond right away, but Katherine could see the conflict in his eyes. He was teetering on the edge, unsure of whether to believe her or to give in to the hopelessness that had claimed so many others. "I don't even know what I'm fighting for anymore," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "You're fighting for your future," Katherine said firmly. "And not just for you. For your mom, for everyone who's ever told you that you couldn't make it. You're stronger than you think, Timothy." For a long time, they sat in silence, the weight of Katherine's words hanging in the air. Timothy wasn't used to people believing in him. He wasn't used to anyone telling him that he could be more than his circumstances. It was a foreign concept, and yet something about it felt right. That night, as Timothy left Katherine's house, something in him shifted. It wasn't a grand revelation or a sudden surge of motivation, but a quiet resolve began to take root in his heart. Maybe Katherine was right. Maybe there was still something worth fighting for, even if it wasn't clear what that something was yet. Over the next year, Timothy's life continued to be a struggle, but he found himself holding on to Katherine's words. When things got tough, when he was tempted to skip school or when his friends tried to pull him into things he knew were wrong, he thought about the look in Katherine's eyes when she told him he was strong. He thought about the meals she had shared with him, the quiet moments they had spent together, and how she had never once given up on him, even when he had almost given up on himself. It wasn't easy. There were days when Timothy felt like he was barely holding on by a thread. His grades at school weren't great, and his home life was still chaotic, but he refused to let himself sink. Slowly, he began to pull away from the negative influences in his life. He started spending more time at the community center, helping out with the younger kids and volunteering for after-school programs. Katherine had always encouraged him to give back, and now, for the first time, Timothy was beginning to understand why. As the months passed, a new sense of purpose began to emerge within Timothy. He didn't know exactly where his life was headed, but he knew he didn't want to end up like so many of the people around him, lost, defeated, and resigned to a life of struggle. He wanted something more, not just for himself, but for his mother, for Katherine, and for the younger kids in the neighborhood who looked up to him, even though he didn't realize it. One afternoon, as Timothy was walking home from school, he stopped by the community center to pick up some supplies for a tutoring session he had volunteered to lead. As he walked through the doors, he was greeted by the familiar sounds of laughter and chatter from the kids playing in the main hall. It was chaotic, but it was a kind of chaos that brought a smile to his face. He made his way to the back room, where the supplies were stored, when he heard a voice behind him. "Timothy, I didn't expect to see you here so early." He turned around to see Mrs. Reed, the head of the community center, standing in the doorway with a clipboard in hand. She was a no-nonsense woman in her late 50s, with sharp eyes and a heart as big as the neighborhood she served. "Yeah, I wanted to get here early and set up for the tutoring session," Timothy replied, feeling a little sheepish. Mrs. Reed smiled, something rare for her, and nodded approvingly. "I've been hearing good things about you, Timothy. The kids love having you around. You're a good influence on them." Timothy felt a strange warmth in his chest at her words. It was one thing for Katherine to believe in him, but hearing it from someone else, someone who had seen countless kids come and go through the community center, made it feel real in a way it hadn't before. "I'm just trying to help," he said, shrugging off the compliment. "You're doing more than that," Mrs. Reed said, her tone serious now. "You're making a difference." As Timothy stood there, holding a stack of textbooks, he realized that Mrs. Reed's words had sparked something in him. He had been so focused on surviving, on just making it through each day, that he hadn't stopped to think about the impact he was having on others. Katherine's kindness had planted the seed, but now it was beginning to grow into something bigger, something with roots. And for the first time in his life, Timothy allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could be more than his circumstances. That evening, as he walked home, Timothy thought about the future in a way he never had before. He still didn't know exactly what he wanted to do, but he knew one thing for sure. He wanted to make Katherine proud. And more than that, he wanted to repay her for everything she had done for him, in ways that went far beyond a simple meal. What neither of them knew was that this journey of growth, struggle, and self-discovery was only the beginning of something much larger, something that would come full circle in a way neither Timothy nor Katherine could have ever imagined. The turning point. As Timothy approached his senior year of high school, he began to feel the weight of expectations, both from within himself and from the outside world. College applications loomed on the horizon, and he felt a gnawing pressure to determine what the future held. With each passing day, the challenges of balancing school, family obligations, and his volunteer commitments at the community center intensified. The hope that had begun to sprout within him was being tested like never before. One Friday afternoon, after a particularly exhausting week, Timothy found himself sitting on the edge of Katherine's porch, staring out at the setting sun. The sky was ablaze with hues of orange and pink, but the beauty of the moment was overshadowed by the turmoil swirling in his mind. He felt like a ship lost at sea, tossed about by waves of doubt and uncertainty. Katherine appeared behind him, her footsteps soft against the wooden boards. She carried a plate of freshly baked cookies, the warm, sugary aroma wrapping around Timothy like a comforting hug. "Thought you might need a little pick-me-up," she said, placing the plate beside him. Timothy managed a small smile. Thanks, Katherine. Just trying to figure things out, I guess. Katherine settled down next to him, her presence soothing as always. What's bothering you? He hesitated, the words caught in his throat. Everything feels like too much. School's harder than ever, and I'm not sure if I can handle it all. Sometimes I wonder if I'm just chasing an impossible dream. Katherine turned to him, her gaze steady. What dream are you chasing, Timothy? I want to go to college, but I don't know how I can afford it, he admitted. With Mom working so hard and barely making ends meet, I can't let her down. But the thought of applying and getting rejected feels like a weight on my chest. Have you talked to anyone about it? She asked gently. Timothy sighed. Not really. I don't want to bother anyone with my problems. Katherine's eyes softened, and she placed a reassuring hand on his back. You're not a burden, Timothy. Sometimes we need to lean on others, and it doesn't mean we're weak. It means we're human. You've been through so much already. You deserve to pursue your dreams. Her words resonated deep within him, igniting a flicker of determination. Timothy had been so focused on doing everything alone that he had overlooked the support system surrounding him. He felt a surge of hope, but it was quickly followed by anxiety. He had to figure out the financial aspect of college, and the thought of tackling that challenge felt daunting. Maybe I'll try to find some scholarships, he said, his voice tentative but filled with newfound resolve. That's a great idea, Katherine encouraged. There are plenty of resources available. Start at school, talk to your guidance counselor. You might be surprised at what you find. Timothy nodded, feeling the stirrings of motivation within him. That night, as he lay in bed, he researched scholarships and college programs, his heart racing at the prospect of a future he had almost stopped dreaming about. For the first time in a long while, he felt a glimmer of excitement. Weeks passed, and Timothy threw himself into researching scholarships. With Katherine's encouragement, he reached out to his teachers for letters of recommendation and began writing personal essays about his experiences. Each application felt like a small step toward his dreams, and with every completed form, he felt a little more empowered. However, just as things began to look up, the weight of his home life came crashing back down. One evening, as Timothy returned home from a long day at school, he was met with a scene that shook him to his core. His mother was sitting on the couch, her face pale and eyes filled with worry. The eviction notice on the coffee table sent a jolt of panic through him. "Mom, what's going on?" he asked, rushing to her side. "We're behind on rent again, Timothy. I don't know how we're going to manage this month. I'm trying to pick up more shifts, but I'm exhausted. And it's not enough," she said, her voice trembling. Timothy's heart sank. He could feel the walls closing in on him. "I'll help you, Mom. I can take on more hours at the community center or find a part-time job. We'll figure this out together." "No, Timothy. You need to focus on school and your future. I can't let you sacrifice your dreams for me," she insisted, her voice breaking. "I'm not sacrificing anything. This is our life, and I can't just stand by while we lose everything we've worked for," Timothy replied, his frustration boiling over. As the argument escalated, Timothy stormed out of the house, desperate for air and clarity. He wandered the streets of Willow Ridge, the weight of the world on his shoulders. He thought of Katherine and the solace she provided. With every step, he felt more lost, more overwhelmed. Finally, he arrived at Katherine's house, his heart pounding with a mix of anger and despair. He knocked on the door, and she opened it almost immediately, concern etched across her face. "Timothy, what's wrong?" she asked, ushering him inside. He didn't even bother to sit down. He just paced back and forth in her living room, trying to articulate the storm swirling within him. "It's my mom. We got an eviction notice, and I feel like I'm running out of options. I've been trying to apply for scholarships, but what if it's not enough? What if I can't help her?" Katherine listened intently, her expression empathetic. I'm so sorry to hear that. It's a tough situation, and it's completely understandable that you're feeling overwhelmed. I don't want to lose our home, Katherine. I can't let that happen, he said, his voice cracking. Katherine moved closer, her eyes softening with compassion. You're doing everything you can, Timothy. Sometimes, all we can do is take things one day at a time. You have to believe that there is a way out of this. You've faced challenges before. This is just another one. Timothy felt a small sense of comfort in her words. I don't know how to keep it together. Start by talking to your mom. She needs to know you're there for her. You're a team, and facing this together will make it a little easier. Also, consider reaching out for community resources. There are programs that can help with rent or utilities. Timothy took a deep breath, trying to process everything she was saying. I guess I hadn't thought about that. I just felt so hopeless. Katherine placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. Hope is what keeps us going, Timothy. When you're feeling lost, remember that you're not alone. You have people who care about you, who want to help. Don't hesitate to lean on them. That night, Timothy returned home feeling a flicker of determination ignite within him once again. He sat down with his mother and shared Katherine's advice. After some reluctance, they agreed to reach out for assistance. They called local organizations that offered emergency support for families facing eviction, and while it was a daunting step, it felt necessary. Weeks turned into a blur of school, late-night phone calls to community organizations, and relentless scholarship applications. The pressures were immense, but Timothy was no longer facing them alone. With each passing day, he felt himself growing stronger, more resilient. Then came the day he had been waiting for. As he walked home from school, he noticed a letter peeking out from the mailbox. His heart raced as he opened it, his fingers trembling with anticipation. It was a scholarship award letter, and the words "Congratulations" jumped off the page. He had been awarded a significant scholarship to a local college, enough to cover tuition for 2 years. Timothy raced to Katherine's house, bursting through the door with excitement. "Katherine, you won't believe it," he exclaimed, waving the letter in the air. Katherine looked up from her knitting, her face lighting up with joy as she took the letter from his hands. "You did it, Timothy. I knew you could. This is incredible. I can't believe it." He laughed, a sense of relief washing over him. "This is a real chance for me, Katherine. I can go to college, and I can help my mom with the rent. We're going to be okay." Katherine enveloped him in a warm hug, her heart swelling with pride for the young man he had become. "You deserve this, Timothy. You've worked so hard, and now it's time for you to take that next step." As they celebrated, Timothy felt a rush of gratitude for Katherine. It wasn't just the cookies or the warm meals she had shared with him that had made a difference. It was her unwavering belief in him that had changed everything. She had become his anchor, guiding him through the storm and helping him find his way. In that moment, Timothy made a silent vow to himself. He would not only pursue his education, but also find a way to give back to those in need. He would honor Katherine's kindness by paying it forward, just as she had done for him. Little did Timothy know that this journey was about to take an unexpected turn, one that would test his resolve and force him to confront the depths of his compassion and strength in ways he never anticipated. The ripple effect. With the scholarship in hand and a renewed sense of purpose, Timothy dove headfirst into his final months of high school. The excitement of college felt like a distant star within reach, a beacon guiding him through the chaos of life at home. His relationship with his mother improved as they navigated the challenges together, each day becoming a little brighter with the promise of a new beginning. Timothy began to engage more with his classmates and teachers, motivated not just by his own dreams, but also by the hope of uplifting others. He started a tutoring program at the community center, encouraging younger students to believe in themselves just as Katherine had believed in him. He found fulfillment in helping others, sharing not only academic knowledge, but also his story, his struggles, his triumphs, and the importance of kindness in the face of adversity. But as Timothy prepared for graduation, A storm brewed on the horizon that threatened to overshadow his accomplishments. One evening, as he finished a tutoring session, he received a call from his mother. Her voice was shaky, and the weight of her words felt like a physical blow. "Timothy, we have a problem," she said, barely holding back tears. "I got laid off from my job today. I'm not sure what we're going to do." The ground felt like it had shifted beneath him. "Mom, what do you mean laid off? I thought things were improving at your job." "I thought so too, but they're downsizing, and I was one of the last hired. They said I could reapply when things settle, but I don't know when that will be," she replied, her voice trembling with worry. Timothy clenched his jaw, fighting back the wave of panic threatening to wash over him. "We'll figure it out, okay? Just take a breath. I can pick up more hours at the community center. We'll make this work." "Timothy, you have to focus on your studies and your scholarship. I can't let you sacrifice your future for me," his mother insisted. "No, we are in this together, Mom. I'm not going to let us fall apart now, not when I'm so close to graduating," he said firmly, trying to steady his voice. As he hung up, Timothy's heart raced with anxiety. The reality of their situation settled heavily on his shoulders. He had fought so hard to find a way out of their struggles, and now it felt like everything was crumbling just when he had finally started to see a path forward. The next few days were a blur. Timothy stayed up late, juggling his final projects and papers, while also picking up shifts at the community center. He reached out to family, friends, and community resources, desperately seeking help for his mother. It was exhausting, both physically and emotionally, but Timothy was determined not to let despair take hold. One evening, as he returned home from another long day, he found his mother sitting at the kitchen table, her face buried in her hands. The sight of her despair broke something inside him. "Mom, please don't lose hope. We'll get through this," he said gently, pulling out a chair and sitting across from her. She looked up, her eyes red and puffy. "I'm just so scared, Timothy. I don't want you to have to worry about me. You've worked so hard, and I can't stand the thought of holding you back." "I'm not going anywhere, and neither are you," he replied, feeling the weight of her fear pressing down on him. "Let's talk about what we can do. Maybe I can reach out to the local churches or community organizations for support. There has to be something we can do." His mother nodded slowly, wiping her tears. "I'd appreciate that. I don't want to feel like a burden to you." "You're not a burden, Mom. You've always sacrificed for me. It's my turn to help you," he reassured her. As they sat together, Timothy felt a fire ignite within him. He was determined to find a way to help his mother, not just for her sake, but also to show her that the sacrifices they had both made were worth it. With a sense of urgency, he began to formulate a plan. Over the next few days, he contacted local charities and reached out to his network at the community center. He spoke to Katherine about the situation, and she immediately offered her support, suggesting they host a community fundraiser to help raise funds for Timothy's family. Katherine's idea sparked something in him. He realized that the very community that had once provided for him could now come together to support someone in need. "I love that idea," Timothy exclaimed, feeling invigorated. "We can set up a potluck and ask for donations. I'll talk to the kids at the center, and I know they'll be willing to help. This could bring everyone together." Katherine's face brightened. "Absolutely. Let's set a date, and I'll help you spread the word. We can use this opportunity to remind everyone about the importance of community support." The following weeks flew by as they organized the fundraiser. Timothy felt a sense of purpose that he hadn't experienced before. He engaged with local businesses, asking for donations for a raffle, and rallied friends and family to prepare food for the potluck. As the day of the fundraiser approached, the entire community buzzed with excitement. The local park was reserved, and people began arriving with dishes to share. Timothy stood at the entrance, greeting everyone with a smile, his heart swelling with gratitude. He watched as families gathered, laughter echoing through the air. Old neighbors chatted and shared stories, while children ran around playing games. It was a beautiful sight, and it filled him with hope. As the evening wore on, Timothy took to the microphone to thank everyone for coming. "I can't express how grateful I am to all of you for being here tonight. A few months ago, I felt completely lost. But thanks to your kindness and generosity, we're beginning to find our way. We're not just raising funds tonight. We're building a community that looks out for one another. We're reminding each other that when we face challenges, we can come together and overcome anything." His words were met with enthusiastic applause. As he looked out at the crowd, he saw Katherine beaming with pride. It was a moment of triumph, not just for him, but for everyone who had ever felt alone in their struggles. The event raised more than he had hoped for, enough to help pay their rent for several months and to support his mother in finding a new job. As the night came to a close, Timothy felt a wave of relief wash over him. But just when he thought things were starting to stabilize, Timothy received an unexpected call. It was the principal from his high school, and Timothy's heart sank as he answered. "Timothy, I need to discuss something important with you. Could you come to my office tomorrow?" His stomach twisted in knots. Was it about the scholarship? What had gone wrong? He spent the entire night tossing and turning, unable to shake the feeling of dread. The next morning, he arrived at the school with trepidation. The principal greeted him with a serious expression. "Thank you for coming, Timothy. I have some news regarding the scholarship you applied for." Timothy's heart raced as he took a seat across from the principal. "What is it?" "I'm sorry to inform you that due to an administrative error, your scholarship application was mistakenly flagged and you were not selected for the funding," the principal explained, his voice calm but heavy with regret. Timothy felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath him. "What do you mean?" "I worked so hard. I thought I had done everything right. I understand how disappointing this is, but there are options available. We can appeal the decision, and I believe we have a strong case given your circumstances," the principal suggested. Timothy fought back tears. "What if it doesn't work out? What if I can't go to college after everything I've been through?" The principal placed a comforting hand on Timothy's shoulder. "I know it feels overwhelming right now, but don't lose hope. You have a community that stands behind you and will fight for you. Remember, setbacks are a part of the journey. You've shown incredible resilience, and I have faith that this isn't the end of your story." Timothy left the office, his mind racing with uncertainty. How could he face his mother after this? Just when things were looking up, he felt as if he had been knocked back down. But as he walked home, he began to reflect on the support he had received from his community during the fundraiser. He had poured his heart into helping others, and now it was time for him to lean on them in return. When he arrived home, he sat down with his mother and shared the news. Instead of despair, they both felt a spark of determination igniting within them. They decided to organize a community meeting, inviting those who had supported the fundraiser, and share Timothy's story. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, they gathered their neighbors in Katherine's living room. Timothy stood before them, his heart pounding as he shared his journey, the challenges he faced, the scholarship that slipped away, and his unwavering hope for a better future. "I'm here today because I believe in the power of our community," Timothy said, his voice steady. "I need your support now more than ever. If we can come together to help one another, I know we can overcome anything." As he spoke, he felt the energy shift in the room. Neighbors nodded in solidarity, and Katherine stood beside him, her pride evident. The spirit of camaraderie filled the air, igniting a collective determination to help one of their own. One neighbor spoke up. "We've seen what you've done for others, Timothy. It's time we return the favor. We'll do everything we can to help you with the appeal and find resources to ensure you can go to college." Others chimed in, offering connections to local businesses and scholarships, promising to rally support for Timothy's education. The atmosphere buzzed with hope and encouragement, and Timothy felt a surge of gratitude wash over him. That night, they crafted a plan to tackle the appeal together. Timothy realized that while the road ahead was uncertain, he wasn't walking it alone. He had built a network of support, and together they would navigate whatever challenges lay ahead. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of meetings, letters, and persistent phone calls. The community rallied around Timothy, sharing his story on social media and gathering support from local leaders. As the news spread, donations poured in, not just for Timothy's scholarship, but for others in similar situations. And finally, after weeks of anxiety and anticipation, Timothy received the letter he had been waiting for. He opened it slowly, heart racing, and read the words that would change his life forever. "We are pleased to inform you that after a review of your case, you have been awarded a scholarship for your first year at university." Joy erupted within him as he shared the news with his mother. They embraced, tears of relief streaming down their faces. Timothy knew this was just the beginning of a new chapter, a testament to the power of community and resilience. As he prepared to leave for college, Timothy reflected on the journey that had led him to this moment. He had faced challenges that had tested his strength and determination, but through it all, he had discovered a profound truth. No one achieves success alone. In the months that followed, Timothy excelled in his studies, earning praise from professors and inspiring fellow students with his story. He volunteered at local outreach programs, continuing to give back to the community that had lifted him during his darkest times. Years later, as he walked across the stage to receive his diploma, he couldn't help but think of Katherine, his mother, and all those who had believed in him when he had struggled to believe in himself. The applause echoed around him, but it was the faces of those who had stood by him that truly filled his heart with gratitude. Timothy made a promise to himself that day. He would continue to advocate for those in need, ensuring that no one felt alone in their struggles. He knew that life would bring more challenges, but armed with the love and support of his community, he felt ready to face whatever lay ahead. And as he turned to wave at the crowd, he felt an overwhelming sense of hope for the future, one that was filled with possibility and the belief that together they could conquer anything. The circle completed. Years passed since Timothy had graduated, and life had taken him on an incredible journey. He had become a mentor, an advocate, and a beacon of hope in his community. Now in his late 20s, Timothy had returned to his old neighborhood, the same streets that once felt heavy with despair now brimming with possibility. He stood in front of the community center where he had once sought help and found his voice. The building had undergone renovations, and the familiar signs still hung outside, albeit fresh and vibrant. Timothy smiled, his heart swelling with nostalgia as he recalled the countless hours he had spent there, both as a struggling student and as a dedicated tutor. Today, he was here for a special reason. He was set to unveil a new scholarship program, one that would honor the very woman who had changed the course of his life, Katherine. The scholarship would provide financial assistance to underprivileged youth in the community, ensuring that they could pursue their dreams just as he had. The community had rallied behind him, and with the help of local businesses, educators, and friends, they had managed to raise enough funds to launch the program. Timothy had dedicated months to building the framework, and today he was ready to share it with everyone. As he stepped into the center, the room buzzed with excitement. Neighbors, old friends, and community leaders filled the seats, their smiles radiating warmth. He spotted Katherine among them, her presence immediately grounding him. Her hair had grayed slightly, but her eyes still sparkled with the same kindness he remembered. "Thank you all for being here today," Timothy began, standing at the podium. "This moment is a culmination of years of hard work, hope, and belief in the power of community. I stand here because of all of you, especially one remarkable woman who taught me the importance of kindness and giving back." He gestured toward Katherine, and the crowd erupted in applause. She blushed, her modesty shining through as she waved back. Timothy took a deep breath, recalling the moment he first met Katherine, the woman who had offered him a simple meal and, unknowingly, changed his life forever. "I remember a time when I felt lost and hopeless," he continued. "Katherine saw me during one of my darkest days, and she didn't just give me food. She gave me dignity, respect, and a sense of belonging. Her act of kindness lit a fire in me, and I realized that I wanted to do the same for others. Timothy shared his journey, from his struggles in school to the day he received the scholarship that had allowed him to go to college. He spoke about the power of community, the way they had rallied around him during his toughest times, and how he had vowed to pay it forward. As I stand here today, I want to ensure that no child in this community ever feels alone in their struggle, he said, his voice rising with passion. The Katherine Scholarship will provide opportunities for those who need it most, just as I did. It will cover tuition fees, educational resources, and mentorship programs for students who show promise but may not have the means to pursue their dreams. The audience erupted in applause once more, the sound echoing off the walls, creating a sense of unity and hope. Timothy continued, I want to invite all of you to join me in this mission. Whether through donations, mentorship, or simply spreading the word, we can make a difference together. Katherine stood in the front row, her eyes glistening with pride and admiration. Timothy noticed her hands clasped together, as if in prayer, and it filled him with warmth. He had always looked up to her as a role model, and now he had the opportunity to honor her legacy. After the presentation, the atmosphere shifted from formal speeches to a more relaxed, celebratory vibe. Attendees mingled, discussing how they could contribute to the scholarship program. Timothy made his way through the crowd, shaking hands and exchanging stories. He felt a tap on his shoulder and turned to see Katherine standing there, a smile gracing her lips. You've done an incredible job, Timothy, she said, her voice filled with emotion. I am so proud of you. This is everything I hoped for and more. Thank you, Katherine. I couldn't have done any of this without you. You were the spark that ignited my journey, he replied, sincerity pouring from his words. They embraced, a moment that spoke volumes of the bond they had formed over the years. Timothy felt a sense of completeness, knowing that he had come full circle, honoring the woman who had once offered him a meal, now giving back to the community that had nurtured him. As the event drew to a close, Timothy and Katherine found a quiet corner of the center. What's next for you? She asked, curiosity shining in her eyes. I'm considering expanding the scholarship to include mentorship programs for young professionals, helping them navigate their careers, he replied. I want to create a network of support, just like the one I had, so they never feel alone in their journey. Katherine nodded, a knowing smile on her face. You're going to change so many lives, Timothy. Just remember to take care of yourself too. You've worked so hard. I will, I promise, he assured her. But it's hard not to feel motivated when I see how far we've come. This community is a testament to what we can achieve when we come together. Their conversation was interrupted by a group of children who approached, eager to ask Timothy questions about his journey. He knelt down to their level, inviting them to share their dreams. What do you want to be when you grow up? He asked a shy girl with bright, curious eyes. I want to be a doctor, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Then you will be a doctor, Timothy encouraged. Just remember to believe in yourself, and don't be afraid to ask for help. We're all here to support each other. As the kids crowded around him, sharing their dreams and aspirations, Timothy felt a sense of joy envelop him. He realized that this was precisely what he had envisioned, a community where every child could dream big and feel supported. The evening faded into night, but the energy in the room remained vibrant. Timothy watched as parents interacted with their children, laughter echoing through the center. It was a living reminder of the impact of connection and kindness. Before leaving, Timothy took a moment to look around the room, soaking in the laughter, the conversations, and the warmth of community. He knew that this was just the beginning. With the launch of the Katherine Scholarship, he had opened the door to new opportunities for countless children. As he walked out with Katherine, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Life had its challenges, but he now understood that through adversity came growth, connection, and the incredible power of giving back. Timothy and Katherine stood outside the center, the cool night air wrapping around them. "Thank you for believing in me all those years ago," Timothy said softly. "You changed my life, Katherine." "No, dear," she replied, her eyes twinkling. "You changed your own life. I merely saw the potential in you. You've become everything I knew you could be, and so much more." In that moment, Timothy felt a deep sense of gratitude. Their lives had intersected at a pivotal moment, and together they have forged a path filled with hope and resilience. "Let's keep this going," Timothy said, determination glinting in his eyes. "Let's ensure that no child feels alone, and that everyone knows they have a place in this community." As they embraced one last time before parting ways, Timothy felt the weight of responsibility shift into a sense of empowerment. He knew that he was just one person, but with a community behind him, he could inspire change and create a legacy of kindness that would ripple through generations. The stars twinkled brightly overhead, illuminating the path ahead. Timothy took a deep breath, filled with excitement and anticipation for what was to come. He had learned that kindness is a cycle. It creates connections, nurtures dreams, and transforms lives. And with that knowledge, he was ready to face the future, knowing that together, they could accomplish anything.